Okay, thank you very much to Luke and PySat for that last presentation. Very informative. As Luke said, if you have questions or queries for any of our presenters, if you don't get the opportunity to ask your questions live, feel free to email us or use the chat function. All of this content is available on demand afterwards as well. So if you do want to post a message and watch the video tomorrow or the next day or in a week's time, we will still monitor that and we'll be able to answer your questions as well. Or you can email us or chat with us directly using the messenger on the Hydromet network. So with that said, we had a good presentation from the WMO earlier in the form of Etienne. Now we have his colleague, Ken Holmland, who's head of space systems and the utilization division of the WMO, to provide a presentation on WIGOS and the evolution of ground and space-based remote sensing systems. So with that said, I'm going to hand over to Ken now. Please feel free to use the chat function in the Q&A to ask questions, and we can throw some questions at Ken at the end of the session. With that said, over to you, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. Hello, everybody. As Gwyn already mentioned, you have heard from my colleague Etienne Charpentier about the WMO Integrated Global Observing System. He was focusing on the ground-based and in-situ part of the system, and I will be focusing on the space-based part. I do have a couple of charts from my colleague Dean Lockett with radars as well. So I will briefly touch upon those items also. So for us, what is important is really to take a close look at the WMO strategic plan and where WMO is going. For us, it's important to note that we should really not leave anyone behind, and we will need to go towards a world where all nations, especially the most vulnerable ones, are more resilient to socioeconomic consequences of extreme weather, climate, and other environmental events. And it is important to note that from a WMO perspective, we are now taking a holistic Earth system approach to this all, and particularly noting also that we are having quite a strong focus also on global numerical weather prediction, because global NWP does underpin most of the WMO application areas. But it is clearly understood, of course, that there are many application areas where you need the data directly. So it's not all coming through global NWP, but it is to some extent an integrator of data. When we look at the meteorological value chain, it of course all starts from the data collection and observations, and this is what Etienne was talking about from a ground-based part, and I'm focusing on the satellite part. But after we have had received the data, we also need to feed that data, as I noted, for modeling and for prediction. And I will have at the end of this presentation a chart also showing how that has evolved over time. After that, when we have these products based on model output and observations, we still need to do some post-processing, automatic production, before this data then is ready for forecast interpretation and for the decision makers for them to make their decisions. After that, this information can be disseminated as products and services to the end users, and only then can we fully understand what lies ahead of us and understand the impact of the environment and optimally use the data and the forecasts that are provided. It is important to note that this part is really critical for getting the socio-economic benefits and where they are generated, and this is done normally nationally, typically by the weather services. It is also important to note that the data collection and the WMO information system, that's where WMO really comes in. It is in the coordinating role for all of this. And it also should be noted that in order to achieve the best benefit of everything, we need to do all of this globally. So the basic WMO infrastructure underpins all weather and climate-related services, and as noted, global is the key word here. For the WMO Integrated Global Observing System, you could see that it has like three parts of it. It has the Global Observing System, the Forecasting System, the Global Telecommunication System. Then it has also the WMO various programs like the Global Atmospheric Watch, Cryosphere, Hydrology, also the Global Climate Observing System. And then that is also all supported by the WMO information system, and all of that comes together into WIGOS. The design and evolution of WIGOS, again, as I noted, Earth system modeling is key here, but this is all driven by what we call the rolling review of requirements process. I will not go into the details of this, but this is really the way we collect the information on what is needed today, and also with a forward look on what is needed in the future. And this is really something which comes from the end users for us to be able to establish how adequate is our observing system today and where should it be in the future. And this, for instance, was driving the activities when we developed the WIGOS vision for 2040, which tries to establish the observing system as we would need it in 20 years from now. So the WIGOS vision implementation, we are looking at that. It was approved by the WMO Congress a couple of years ago, and we are all the time reviewing this. We are looking at the evolution of the requirements. Requirements are not stable, so we will look at, is this still an adequate vision in the years to come? And we will look at also the potential gaps in that vision and try to encourage the WMO members and the space agencies to fulfill and to try to address those gaps. One way to do that, as you heard already before from Etienne, is the approach for the global basic observing network, and then also using tools like the financial facilities, systematic observation financial facilities, the SOF, and country support initiatives that Etienne already also mentioned. WIGOS 2040 vision also gives very strong details on the space components, and the space-based components is detailed in 4 subcomponents. And for those who are familiar with satellites, we talk about backbone system. These are the geostationary satellites and polar orbiting satellites in 3 orbital planes. But we need to further augment that system with additional open orbit configurations, with flexibility to optimize the implementation. So looking at satellites in other orbits, and also we're looking at operational pathfinders. You may have heard about the small sats and the CubeSats, and commercial sector is also now coming in with commercial operators providing data, for instance, radio occultation data that you can buy. So the WIGOS vision is quite visionary. It takes all of this into account, and we will be further looking at how adequate that is in the future. If you look at the Earth observing systems from space, we've come a long way. On the right-hand side, you see the first weather satellite image. That's from 1960 in April, so basically more than 60 years ago. So in those days, that was the first satellite, and in the 60s, we had only a few of them. And you see here in the table on the left, 2 things. First of all, how the number of satellites has been increasing quite dramatically over time. But not only that, the spacefaring nations providing Earth observations from space is also increasing all the time. So it is a big family, and it is growing all the time. And there's a clear increase also in not only the diversity and number of spacecraft, but also in types of observations and the quality of observations. So the space-based component of WIGOS, this is a snapshot showing what was there last year, 2020, roughly 200 operational satellites that provide Earth observations. Since then, there have been some interesting developments. Russia, for instance, have launched a satellite in what is called the Molniya orbit. This is an orbit where the satellite hovers over the North Pole, then it dives down over the South Pole and comes up again. and hovers for 8 hours over the North Pole. So it is almost giving you a geostationary capability over the high latitude. So this is a very, very exciting new development for us. There are also other interesting missions. For instance, the European Space Agency has recently launched a lidar mission for wind profiling. It's been up already a couple of years, and it provides very, very important observations on wind profiles globally, which is really showing great impact on global NWP. Ground-based radars, another way of doing remote sensing. This you are, of course, very well familiar with, which basically was developed from aircraft surveillance radar systems. But it has been used to monitor and assess the severity of weather systems since the mid-20th century. Strength or return of echoes is correlated with rain rates, and from that you can retrieve total rainfall estimations. And with the advent of Doppler radars, you of course also get estimations of wind speeds. And now recently, weather radar data is also being fed directly into global NWP models and regional models, and they are already showing great impact on them as well. You saw the picture of the satellites, and here's a picture of the radars. Weather radars, you can see quite a nice distribution of these weather radars, and you can see here on the top right the coverage that is today provided. You also see different manufacturers here and the number of radars they have produced, and you also see here a distribution of various frequency bands used for these radars. This is giving quite a good coverage, which is really, really good, but you do also see wide areas, for instance, here in Africa, where the radar network is not so dense. And I will be coming back to that on how we at least can mitigate the lack of radar data using satellite data. When we have our observing networks, we also need to monitor that. And I think that also this was mentioned by Etienne already earlier. So I don't need to go into details here, but you can go to the WMO WIGOS Data Quality Management System, WDQMS. Here is the link to it, and you can look at the information it provides on status of reporting observations in near real time. We are within the space side, and this is also, Etienne mentioned, OSCAR Surface. So we have also an OSCAR Space, and OSCAR Space is really a very great tool for looking at what kind of satellites are up there. It has captured over 700 satellites, over 1,000 instruments, and it has a lot of information. You can also do search on the type of observations or type of instruments and application areas, so you can see which instrument can contribute to which kind of application area. So I truly encourage you to go and have a look at OSCAR Space. You can follow the link here, or you just do a search on WMO and OSCAR and Space, and then you will certainly find it. So we already noted in the chart of the value chain that we need to exchange data globally, and international data exchange is really a major purpose of WMO. It's been in our convention for a long time, and it is really at the essence of what we do. We do have today Resolution 40, a data policy for meteorological data. We also have one for hydrology and for climate, Resolutions 25 and 60. But what we are now looking at is to take into account the evolution of the last few years, the technological evolution and the requirements evolution and the capabilities, the new opportunities with new scientific understanding. And we will actually work towards a new resolution, which we hope that our Congress, the WMO Congress, will approve later this year, towards the end of the year. The old resolution actually didn't say much about satellites, just says some of those data and products that are agreed between WMO and satellite operators. And it was really from a time from 1995 when satellite data was only used to visualize weather systems in support of bench forecasting. But the data itself didn't give you really high quality data that could be used directly in application areas or in global NWP. but in the last 25 years, we have come a long way. And therefore, also this change will have to be reflected in the data policy. The new WMO Unified Data Policy, it has some main changes, which are here. If you look at the old one, it covered only weather data. Now it covers the full system data. We are not talking about essential anymore, because essential has been used also in other contexts. We are now talking about, about core data, and instead of additional, recommended data. It is also important to note that the actual data policy does not give really a lot of detail on what kind of data shall be exchanged or should be exchanged. This will be detailed in the technical regulations, primarily manuals on WIGOS and GDPFS. What is important, though, is that we do push for free and unrestricted exchange of data. We have had several examples, and I think it's been unequivocally demonstrated that the best value for data comes from free and open exchange. If you give data away for free, you might think that you lose something, but when you give something away, you get so much more back from other observations from other people. And in meteorology, we always have to exchange. We cannot just work in isolation in a small area or a country. Weather and weather travels across the borders, so we do need to exchange data. WMO, as also Etienne noted, we have our different regions, and also with respect to the satellite data, we are working with regional satellite data groups. We have the following groups listed here on the left, covering Africa, Asia. We have a combined one for the Americas, and then we have one for Southwest Pacific, but also taking the North Pacific into account. The objective of our regional satellite data groups is to have that as a user-provider dialogue, expressing user requirements, coordinating data distribution, also identifying training needs, and we also use that for implementing the WIGOS and the WIS. Talking about training, WMO has, of course, its training center, ETR, but we also do specific training for education in satellite meteorology. This is called the virtual lab, so VLab, and this is a very great resource also for accessing satellite data and to try to understand how satellite data can be used for your own application areas. So please have a look at what VLab can offer. An example here from 2019 was training using the Himawari and GeoComSat satellite series with the new imaging capabilities from their AHI and AHI instruments. And these are really great new generation images with a lot of new capabilities. And the same capabilities are already today also provided with the new GOES satellites over the Americas. And also soon, EUMETSAT will launch its Meteosat third generation satellite, which will have very similar capabilities as well. We have a new geo ring of capabilities covering most of the globe, not the high latitudes, but this is then again covered by the excellent imagers on the low Earth orbit satellite. So we get a really nice integrated global view of the Earth now with the meteorological satellites. And then an example here is GOES and JPSS. So JPSS is the polar orbiting satellite from NOAA, and you can also then see the synergies of these different satellites and their data. You should also look at things like the space weather and climate extremes monitoring. This is a project we are running, the SWECAM, and this is something which is really interesting because it links very closely to the regional climate centers and regional training centers. And here you have really everybody coming together to look at what can be done with space-based observations in support of extreme weather and climate events. And it's a cross-cutting approach, really looking into the different players. So you have the space agencies coming in, you have the meteorological satellite operators coming in, the Coordination Group for Meteorological Satellites, also there, and GEONETCast and others. And it really is a great resource also for ensuring that you have the right information at your fingertips. So to finish off, I'll just will show you some things. This is GOES 16 full disk loop animation. You can see how nicely you can, with the new imagers, you can get this fantastic view of the globe in almost true color. And now when we have launched the highly elliptical orbit mission, you can also get the same kind of animations over the North Pole, so over Arctica. So this is really very exciting to see these capabilities, which really benefits not only the Arctic regions, but it also fills a data void gap, which will also support global NWP. And you can do more from GEO. This is a Chinese mission, GF4, and this is absolutely fantastic. If you look at this, is spatial resolution of 50 meters, and you have a temporal resolution of 10 or 20 or 60 seconds. And with that, you really can see how the eye of the hurricanes or the typhoons is rotating and moving. So you can do really great things with satellite data these days. So I mentioned before about the radars and the data void areas, and what we can do today is that when we have the geostationary imagers, and then on the new generation geostationary satellites like on the Chinese FY4 or the GOES satellites, they also have a lightning mappers, and MTG will also have that over Europe. So when you then combine the imagery data with the lightning data, and you go into a radar void area, then this is actually one way to mitigate it. You could almost call this a poor man's radar, because you can from this infer where the really strong convection is going, and you can also use approximative methods to derive rain rates. So this is something which would be quite exciting in the future, for instance, for Africa over Lake Victoria. We do satellite data use surveys in order to really understand what the needs of the users are, and we will soon go out with a new user survey. So I hope that all of you will be able to respond to our next survey. We have a satellite user readiness navigator. You can go here. It focuses on the new upcoming new missions. So this time there's a lot of new information from the EUMETSAT Meteosat third generation satellite and their polar orbiting EPS second generation satellite. But also you can find information about other fairly recent new missions like the GOES or the Himawari satellites. It's also important to note that we are working on ensuring that you also can have access to the data. So we are working on what we call the DBNet system, and this is a direct broadcast system. And this is just an example on how we can use such a system to collect data in near real time and then feed it back to global NWP. For many users, the GEONETCast system is the primary way to get access to satellite data and other observations and model data as well. And this chart shows you the coverage for the different parts. So you have the EUMETCast and GEONETCast Americas in orange, EUMETCast in yellow, EUMETCast only for Europe in gray, and then CMAcast in red. So very good coverage over the whole globe. And this is basically a system where you can get the data with just a very simple TV reception system. So it doesn't actually cost you a lot either to set up this system. You need a normal antenna, TV antenna, and a receiver, LNB, and then you need to feed it to your computer. So a very affordable system. And I have gone through this. It also has a training channel you would like to note. and I will not go into further details on that here. With respect to radar data, we are of course working on guidance and common standards, and this has been done together with ISO. And this really is important in order for us to be able to have efficient exchange of data and for the users to have a common framework to work on. So data formats also for the satellite data is essential. We need to have simple formats that the end users can use without problems. In the old days, we had very complicated data formats. And even today, some of the data formats like buffer and grid on the GTS are not that easy, but we are now also having quite a lot of data, and most data available in standard formats or today's new formats like NetCDA. International exchange of radar data has in the past been limited to international efforts to monitor large-scale systems. But more recently, data exchange is required to support operation of regional radar networks, assimilation of high-resolution weather models, as I mentioned before, and also for climate studies. It's also interesting data for satellite validation and cross-calibration. There are still some challenges here, for instance, again, on data policy and the complexity of the data model. And of course, this is also large volumes of data, so we have still some challenges ahead of us. So here's an example of the radar data model and how you can actually represent the data in an efficient way. Last but not least, I would like to note that we're also working together with ITU, and we are looking at the frequency protection. So some frequencies that are used both for communicating with ground-based observations, but also observations that we are doing from space will be affected by frequency issues. So we are working closely with the Telecommunications Union to ensure that these frequencies that are critical for us are protected. And we will present our position on these issues at the upcoming World Radio Communication Conference in 2023. Last but not least, I will not go into a lot of detail here, but we're also working and supporting space weather activities. We have a set of expert teams supporting us both for space and for radars, but also on space weather, radio frequency, and on the design of the Earth observing system, design and evolution. Just to finish off, I only have a couple of minutes left. Just some examples of what you can do with satellite data. This is integrated microwave animations of integrated water vapor. So you take all the microwave data you have from your various satellites, you calibrate them, and then you can get these atmospheric rivers, for instance, that you can see flowing around, and you can really get great animations and see what's happening across the full globe in a very consistent manner. I mentioned before the improvements we made in forecasting. This is a chart I really like to look at. I was myself doing bench forecasting in the early 80s, and you can see that today, for instance, a 3-day forecast or 5-day forecast, which you see here, is better than the 3-day forecast I was using or doing in the early 80s. So there's been great improvements in the last 30 years. The other thing I would like to note is that some 15, 20 years ago, there was a dramatic change here. This was basically with a more efficient use of satellite data and the advent of 4D VAR and 3D VAR. And you can see this graph here, which is showing the forecast performance in the northern hemisphere and forecast performance in the southern hemisphere, the top chart and the bottom of the same color. And you can see these are now almost the same. So the southern hemisphere performance is the same these days as the northern hemisphere performance. This is mainly due to the improved modeling, improved physics, and improved use of satellite data, and better satellite data, of course. And another way to look at it is how we do satellites today. You have two forecasts here. On the top, you have a forecast with satellites, and you have a very good depiction of the Hurricane Irma here. Without satellites, the forecast would never have picked up this storm, and it actually gave 5 to 7 day warning of landfall. And this all came to the initial conditions, top right of this figure, on the 700 hectopascal humidity fields. So satellites are really quite important these days. And I will actually, this is more related to using the satellite data as cheap proxy for radars, and I will not go into details with that. I will show you just the new exciting, not exiting, exciting capabilities with lidar and the impact, positive impact that has had on global NWP. And with that, my time is up, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for that, Ken. That was great. Unfortunately, we haven't got any time for questions. So what I'm going to ask people to do is, if you can use the chat function to forward questions to us, we can make sure that Ken and the team at WMO receive questions, and hopefully we can get some answers that way. But with that said, thank you very much. That was very informative. And please move to the next session now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.